We've benefited from having a longstanding, excellent relationship with them, and we really value the partnership. I do want to begin by acknowledging the challenging work of law enforcement. And we all know as a country, we were experiencing a mental health and substance misuse crisis even before COVID-19 hit us. So police, law enforcement are being asked to do more. We have had a lack of, nationally speaking, reinvestment in the mental health system. There are issues of parity and access to programs, and of course the stigma as well. So our goal is to create a continuum of services to avert unnecessary crisis and potentially having law enforcement to even have to get involved. For us, any crisis situation with a person with mental health issues or without is an important safety issue. So when we talk about safety, and Mark and Deputy Commissioner Glazer will talk a lot about safety of all first responders, of individuals who are struggling in that situation, and also others who may be involved. Our goal this afternoon is to provide a little bit of an overview of the different models that we tend to focus on, looking at some existing resources and services that we do have in Westchester County, but also explore other potential models that could be highlighted as we move forward. So we're really fortunate to have Deputy Commissioner Glazer and Mark Giuliano, our program director. And for those of you who don't know Mark's been doing this work for 20, 25 plus years, and not only has a reputation in our county, but across the state and country in partnerships with first responders and police officers. And he's put together a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go over and then allow for some opportunity, as Blanca said, for discussion and some dialogue as well. So we thank everyone for your leadership, for your commitment to this work, and we look forward to a continued partnership. So with that said, Mark, do you want to begin and introduce the slides?
Is there a way for the slides to be presented? I don't think we're sharing the slides at this point. So if you guys can get the slides up, I'll be happy to begin to speak.
Yes.
In the meantime, what I will say is that what the commissioner said was absolutely right. We have had a long-standing relationship with not only our county Department of Public Safety, but with many of the police departments throughout Westchester County. You can just move right into the next slide. Since I can't, there we go. All right, so when we take a look at law enforcement interaction, go ahead. You can move it right to the next slide. We're good to move forward. When we take a look at law enforcement interaction with people who are in a state of emotional crisis, the majority of the time there are positive outcomes. We can take a look. A couple of years ago, there was an article in the New York Post that highlighted a law enforcement professional who saved the life of a person who was about to jump off the 10th story of a building. We can take a look 2 years ago in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You've got an incident right here in the city of White Plains in which officers ended up saving a man who is going to jump over the bridge onto the Bronx River Parkway. And then the one in the middle actually happened this past week. On the 15th of November, members of the Tuckahoe Police Department, the Yonkers Emergency Service Unit, as well as Westchester County Emergency Service Unit, ended up saving the life of a man who was intent on jumping from the Tuckahoe Road overpass onto the Bronx River Parkway. And these are just a few of the instances in which we've had really successful outcomes when law enforcement has had to interact with people who are in a state of true emotional and behavioral health crisis. Many times it's not anything as dramatic as this. There's day after day that goes by that law enforcement professionals act as supportive people within the lives of people who have emotional issues or mental health concerns, and can often act as a catalyst to helping people really work towards their recovery. Let's move to the next slide. There are some issues that come up when law enforcement encounters people who are in a state of crisis.
Sorry, Mark.
No problem. And the two major concerns that have come up, not just here in Westchester County, but really across the entire country. You have to hit these a couple of times. The first of the problems is adverse incidents or tragic outcomes. One of the most famous is the incident that happened in Memphis, Tennessee in 1987, which a gentleman who had a bladed instrument had charged or advanced on officers, and he ended up dying within that incident. The community took a look at how the interaction between law enforcement and people with mental health concerns were intersecting. In 1987, the Memphis Police Department started the first CIT training program, or the Crisis Intervention Team training program, in the United States. There are others in just about every community. We could look locally in many of our own communities and see that there have absolutely been times in which we've had tragic outcomes in which either a police officer was injured from a person who's in a state of crisis, or a person with mental health concerns was either injured or killed in the interaction with police and when they were in a state of crisis. So we could look through many of our communities. So the fact is, if we look in retrospect at some of those incidents, we can learn from each of those, and I think that we can do a little bit better. The other issue that comes up is the disproportionate rates of incarceration. If we take a look around the country, we've got about 4% to 5% of the population has serious mental health concerns. That means 95% of us don't. But when you look at the rates of incarceration up at, for example, our local county jail, if you hit the next couple of bullets down, what you'll see is it's going to detail that somewhere between 17 and 50% of the population of people who are incarcerated have a serious mental health concern. And if we were to call up Commissioner Spano or DC Leo Diaz and say, hey, how many of you guys do you have that are on mental health medications? They would say it's probably about 60% of the population. The reality is that not everyone who's behind bars has a serious mental health concern, and it's not even 60%, but it's certainly a disproportionate number of people that are incarcerated. So when we look at these encounters, we end up with two outcomes that are really undesirable. Those adverse incidents in which a person with mental health concerns or a law enforcement professional are injured, or a person in the community may be injured. And we also know that people with serious mental health concerns are more likely to end up behind bars than other people. Move to the next slide. Solution. Really, the solution for us is to look to transform the crisis response system to minimize the times that law enforcement are the first responders to residents with emotional distress. I don't think that there's any law enforcement professional that's out there that would disagree with the fact that they've got other things to do than deal with people who might be in a state of emotional distress. And we've already seen that the vast majority of the times in which they have to respond to a person who's experiencing emotional distress, it goes well, but there are other times in which it hasn't. So if it turns out that we have to put a law enforcement professional into that first responder, knowing that there are limitations to the mental health system, there are limitations to our emergency response system on the mental health side of the fence and the substance use side of the fence, law enforcement professionals tend to end up being that first response and that first line of defense for us when we've got somebody who's in a state of emotional crisis. If it were my family member who was in a state of emotional crisis and an officer had to come to my family's home, I would want those first hands to touch my family member to be trained hands. I would want them to have the knowledge, the skills, and the support to de-escalate the situation and divert the person from the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system when appropriate. So sometimes when a person goes into a state of crisis, there's no criminal element, but we still expect law enforcement to be there to de-escalate that person and get them the help that they need. There are times in which people have committed a criminal offense, and it may be a minor criminal offense. If we can divert that person from the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system and get them the help that they need, that would be our preferred or desired outcome. So as I said before, if it were my family member, I would want to make sure that the people responding had the skill set in order to make sure that my family member stayed safe. And the vast majority of the time, law enforcement does that. Move to the next slide. So a few years back, I had the privilege of learning about sequential intercept mapping. It's the sequential intercept model and system mapping from Patty Griffith, who developed this in partnership with Mark Munitz. Sequential Intercept model provides a conceptual framework for communities to use when considering the interface between criminal justice, mental health, substance use, social service systems as they address the concerns of people who have mental health concerns that are coming into the justice system. Move right into the next slide. And as I learned about this model from Patty, I also learned about it from Hank Stedman, who ran Policy Research Associates, which operates the National Gain Center for people with co-occurring disorders in the justice system. And my friend and mentor, Hank Stedman, said to me that if you take a look at the criminal justice system, it's a people processing system. People enter the system at the point of contact with 911 and law enforcement, and they're processed through the courts, the initial court hearing. They may end up in jail. They may end up in the community. They eventually will re-enter our community, sometimes after a period of prison, sometimes after a period of incarceration at the local jail. And then we have community corrections that often pick up that are often tasked with coordinating services for people who have serious mental health concerns. But Hank went on to say that if you look at each one of these intercepts, it's not about processing. Each one of these intercepts is an opportunity for us to intervene in the lives of people. At Intercept Zero, when I first learned about this model, there was no Intercept Zero. Steve Michio from People USA, who's one of our partners in the crisis stabilization team, actually in conversation said, so what we're really talking about is diverting people before that 911 call. We should call that Intercept Zero. And that's how Intercept Zero came to be. And those are our crisis lines and our crisis care continuum within any community. I've had the privilege of being able to provide system mapping for 23 or 24 counties in New York State, wearing a different hat in some consulting work that I do for the Institute for Police Mental Health and Community Collaboration. And I've been able to take a look at many of the crisis systems throughout the state. And if we're looking at law enforcement interaction, we're looking at Intercept Zero and Intercept One, before law enforcement becomes involved or at the point that the person's going into a state of crisis and law enforcement has become involved. Let's move to the next slide. No matter where you fall within the justice system, whether it be at the point of contact with law enforcement or through the courts or within community corrections, right through the system, we do have some goals that are consistent. On the mental health side of the fence, as well as the criminal justice side of the fence or the justice side of the fence, we want to increase public safety or community safety for the officers that we have in the community, for citizens that we have in the community, for citizens that we have that are struggling with mental health concern. We want to increase community safety. And before I move forward, I want to point out that there is often misinformation that people with mental illness are much more dangerous, scary, or violent than the rest of the population. That simply isn't true. But when people are in a state of crisis, people's safety can be compromised. So we want to move through these interventions in a planned, skillful way. So we want to increase the safety for people in crisis, and we also all want to promote recovery for people with mental health concerns and co-occurring disorders so that we don't have to continue to come back through the system and cycle through the system. There's another way of looking at the sequential intercept model in which it's a circular model, knowing that people will re-enter the system. We want to disrupt that so that people can move towards having a meaningful life, working towards recovery, however they determine that to be for themselves. Let's move to the next slide. So if we take a look at Intercept 0 and 1 in Westchester County, we have some pieces of the puzzle already put in place. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide talking about Intercept 1 because that's going to be what comes in the next few slides. But within Intercept 0, we have our homeless outreach and community placement team. When we first began our homeless outreach community placement team in 1999, we actually quickly partnered with the White Plains Police Department within their community policing division because we were engaging the same people, the people that needed to be connected with services. They weren't looking at people from a justice involvement or a criminal perspective, but they wanted to make sure that the citizens of White Plains that were homeless were connected with services, and we wanted to make sure that happened as well. We also have our Yonkers Triage team, which is a number of different organizations, entities within the Yonkers community, once again, looking to divert people from the justice system, making sure that they get connected with services, whether it be peer support, substance use services. We're looking to make sure that people get connected not only with supports and services, but ultimately housing to keep them stable and keep them safe. Knowing that housing shouldn't be a privilege that people have, it should be a fundamental human right. Both of these programs work to try and get people connected with the appropriate resources. Then finally, we have our St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team, which does provide support from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. They do take referrals from law enforcement organizations, but they also take referrals from many community agencies. If it turned out that, once again, my family member went into a state of crisis, I could call the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team, and I would anticipate that they would have a meaningful response to get my family member de-escalated and make sure that they were connected with services. We have a whole host of agencies throughout Westchester that are supposed to have crisis plans for the people that they serve. We also have warm lines. We have hotlines, suicide prevention hotlines. All of those things really fall within Intercept Zero. And these are all the things that should occur before a family member picks up the phone or a person in crisis picks up the phone and dials 911. So these are the things that should be in place for the community, including the living room, which is run through HDSW, including some of our peer support centers. We're really talking about the full breadth of the mental health system, as well as the substance use system, to try and help people stay out of that state of crisis. One of the issues is that the number that is most readily available, if you were in your deepest, darkest hour and you were in a dire state, you're probably not going to remember the telephone number for the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team. You might not remember the telephone number for the living room. The number that you're likely to remember is 911, and that starts the process. So within Intercept 1, we've got CIT and our police mental health response teams, as well as a mobile assessment program. We do have the People USA Crisis Stabilization Team, and then Deputy Commissioner Glazer was able to negotiate with the DA's office to set up a data system match using the Ricky fingerprint system. At one point, we had many people that came into contact with law enforcement that were taken into custody that would go into the county jail, and we had a data match system. But now in the era of bail reform, there are far fewer people who end up in the Department of Corrections. So we set up a data match system for those people who have been fingerprinted. There are flaws within the system, no doubt. Not every police agency in Westchester County uses the Ricky data match system, but it's given us a really good handle on when the people that we serve in the Department of Mental Health have come in contact with law enforcement for a criminal arrest. And those are some of the things we're going to talk about over the next couple of slides. Let's move to the next slide and we'll talk about CIT. Crisis Intervention Team started in the United States in 1987 in Memphis, Tennessee, and the state of New York was woefully behind in CIT programs for a long, long time. Part of the problem was that New York City is the tail that wags the dog for New York State, and many of the police representatives in New York City said, we're different. This CIT thing, it's not going to work here because we function different. We've got a larger population. We've got a more complex system. It just simply won't work here. Well, recently, New York City has embraced the CIT model, as well as a few other models that we're going to discuss here. But there are many other cities that are sizable that it did work in Los Angeles, in Miami-Dade, in Chicago. In fact, if you were to have gone out to Ohio, a number of years ago, just about every community had a CIT program. The first CIT program that comes into existence in New York State is in the Rochester Police Department. They don't call it a CIT program, a crisis intervention team program. They called it the Emotionally Disturbed Persons Response Team. You can click the next piece of the puzzle because that'll, yeah, there we go. So the Emotionally Disturbed Persons Response Team had such success after they had a number of untoward incidents in the city of Rochester, they began to do their business a little bit differently. If it turned out that they had a person who was a rational bad guy, if you will, if there is such a thing as a rational bad guy, what they found is that the bad guys in the community, they were injuring officers at a rate of about 5%. And those people in the community, those times that the bad guy interacted with the law enforcement professional, well, the bad guy was injured about 5% of the time. This was a really informal study that was done by Eric Weaver, who was a commanding officer of the Emotionally Disturbed Persons Response Team. When he also looked at those interactions with people who are in a state of crisis, well, people with mental illness who were in a state of crisis were injured about 5% of the time, which is an interesting number, because that meant that law enforcement professionals were approaching people with the same tools on their tool belt and the same skill set that they would if they were interacting with a person who was a perpetrator of a crime. But the really interesting number is that when they looked at the officer injury rates, they more than doubled. About 12% of the time, law enforcement professionals were injured when dealing with that person who is in a state of emotional crisis. Once again, not to say that people with mental illness are any more dangerous, scary, or violent than the rest of the population, but if you use the tools that are common within policing. If you think about it, policing is really predicated on intimidation. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of lights, things move very quickly, and the police go home safely at the end of the interaction. If you're living in a state of perpetual fear because of the fact that you've got paranoid delusions, persecutory delusions, when you approach a person using those tactics of intimidation, you're likely to have an adverse outcome in which the officer is injured because the person isn't acting out of malice, they're acting out of fear. So when they began to deliver the CIT training up there, and they began to really encourage de-escalation and communication and linkage with resources, their rates of injury to citizens who had mental health concerns that were in the community dropped dramatically, and the officer injury rates dropped from 12% to 0%. Just by reprioritizing the skill set, not to take any tool off of the officer's belt, but to just reprioritize the skill set that you would need in order to work successfully with a person with emotional disturbance or who's emotionally distressed. This was so successful that in 2006, New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services began to offer a series of in-service trainings throughout New York. In the Rockland County class, my counterpart in Western New York, Don Kamen, was on vacation, and I was asked to pinch hit for Don to talk about the mental health aspects here in the Hudson Valley region and to address the clinical pieces of the picture. I was so impressed with the caliber of the training and what they were trying to accomplish. I wanted to make sure that this training continued to be delivered here in Westchester, and from 2007 until 2020, we've continued to deliver CIT training. With that CIT training, what I will tell you is initially we brought down what we considered the experts from Monroe County. But as time went on, I realized that the people that I had coming from Monroe County, we had the same people here in Westchester. And it was really about developing that partnership between the mental health provider community and law enforcement. So we got rid of the law enforcement professionals that were coming down from Monroe County, and we began to use the people that we had within our community. I had already been training with Detective Rob Barber, delivering the police mental health training to all of our recruits from 2000 until 2006, and he was doing it before I was. So he was a natural fit to begin to develop, to deliver some of the CIT training. We wanted the officers that were participating to be in contact with the psychiatrist who they might meet in the emergency room. We wanted the case management agencies and the assertive community treatment teams that the law enforcement professionals might encounter to be able to present so that they could begin to develop those partnerships and those relationships. So a CIT is not a police training program. It's a partnership between law enforcement, 911 personnel, our mental health, substance use, DSS, provider community, advocacy and family support organizations. The role of NAMI is immeasurably important within this. The role of people with lived experience coming in and sharing what it's like to live with a mental illness are also, it's also fantastic experience for officers to be able to see people when they're not in a state of crisis. And then we look towards we look towards other people within the community, including some of the local business community, as well as our partners in the OPWDD side of the fence, as well as the Alzheimer's Association, to deliver this training, but then operationalize this as a program. Let's move to the next slide. Once again, our goals for CIT, we're looking to improve safety for people in the community, citizens in the community, for people who have mental health concerns, for law enforcement personnel, and we're looking to enhance police skill to respond to a state of mental health crisis. Now, in the Hudson Valley region, beyond Westchester County, I'll tell you that the Hudson Valley region is a little bit divergent than many other parts of the state. Many other parts of the state say that we should only have experienced officers receive CIT training. Well, in Westchester, in Dutchess, in Orange County, all of the counties that are around us, with the exception of Rockland, what we've done is we've offered the full 40 hours, or I should say a full 40 hours of CIT training to new recruits, because we want those hands to be skilled hands as well. We recognize that they're not going to be CIT officers right out of the door. They're receiving a modified version of the training. They're not the people that need to make the connections, but we do want them to have the appropriate skill set, knowing that they're going to be spending more time interacting with people who might be experiencing a state of crisis than just about anything else that they do within policing. We also want to make the mental health system understandable and accessible. When I jumped the fence from developmental disability services into adult mental health services in 1999, I was thankful that I wasn't somebody who was struggling with a serious mental health concern, because when I first began to take a look at the system, I could make heads nor tails of how to access things and where the pieces of the puzzle fit. It was a confusing system, and it felt inaccessible at times. So within the CIT model, we're looking to make that system a system that's more accessible, so that it's not confusing for families. It's not confusing for a person who's experienced a crisis. It's not confusing for first responders who are trying to help families negotiate and navigate it. And once again, we're looking to defer people with mental health concerns from the criminal justice system and juvenile justice system when it's appropriate to do so. Let's move to the next slide. So some of the core goals, got to bring them down. This is where we diverge from the rest of the state and from CIT International, quite honestly, saying that it has to be experienced volunteers who are screened. I absolutely agree. If it turns out that we're going to have a CIT program, it should not be new recruits that are coming in the door. They should absolutely be officers who want to do this, that have a passion for it. And if it turns out that you have a police agency in which you have no one who steps forward and says, I want to do this, there are some sergeants and some people who have the brass on their collars and the stripes on their sleeves, who know the people on their departments, who have a really good skill set at being able to act and interact with people. And sometimes the person needs to be voluntold, but it's a voluntold because their supervisors know that this is a person who does well with people and can engage people within the community. CIT programs also require a CIT coordinator or a commanding officer, and that should be identified prior to the training. So if you're truly going to develop a CIT team, it's not just about sending some officers to get some training. You should have a CIT coordinator on the criminal justice, on the police side of the fence, somebody who's really going to, there's a lot of words there on that chat. I will try and take a look at it momentarily. You should have someone on the law enforcement side of the fence who's going to take responsibility of making sure that that CIT team runs properly. From my perspective, a CIT coordinator, commanding officer, within their team of CIT trained officers, they should have specific training days so that they can continue their education on how to deal with people. There should be a PIN that's designated so that if a person's in a state of crisis and they see that the CIT officer is wearing a CIT pin, that they recognize that this is an officer with advanced training in the field of mental illness or mental health and substance use. And also the clinician in the emergency department or the other community supporters will recognize that that officer has specialized training within this field. So I think that's one of the places that we've lacked within our community. We've never had the opportunity to get those CIT pins out there. And that puts us at a disadvantage within the national or international conferences because they have a CIT pin competition and we can't compete because we don't have a pin. But that's here nor there. It's more about trying to help make sure that the person in crisis and the system understands that this is an officer who has advanced training. Just like any other specialized police program, your ESU, SWAT, your aviation, your any of the other scuba, they all have something to designate that they're a part of a specialized team. And CIT officers really are a part of a specialized team. Whether that means that they receive an additional compensation within their pay, that's up to the municipalities, that's up to the unions. I can't speak to that, but from my perspective, they really should be specialists within this. Not only do we need to have a coordinator on the law enforcement side of the fence, but you also have to have a responsive mental health system and have a mental health system coordinator liaison. I can tell you that for the most part, that has been my role for many years within the Department of Community Mental Health. I've acted as the liaison for many of the police departments. I've worked with many of them very closely to make sure that if they encounter somebody's in a state of emotional crisis, they know how to get them to the appropriate resources, and we work hand in hand cooperatively together. And then there's a core curriculum with local adaptation. And if you move to the next slide, it'll give you an idea of some of the things that we talk about within the CIT program. And yes, evaluation always should come in as well. We should take a look to make sure that what we're doing is working. Our core curriculum includes how to identify a person who might be in a state of crisis. It also talks about some of the common core things which would propel a person into a state of crisis. We look at communication de-escalation. We take a look at the mental hygiene law and HIPAA, FERPA, all of the legal issues that come into play, 42 CFR Part 2. We take a look at mental health concerns and some of the common diagnoses so that there's a common language. We examine suicide risk and suicide intervention, not only for people within the community, but for law enforcement professionals as well, because we know there's an overwhelming number of law enforcement professionals who end up taking their lives on an annual basis. We look at people who may have substance use and alcohol use issues. We always include recipients or people with lived experience as well as family members to come in and talk about what it's like to struggle with a mental health concern. We use a hearing voices exercise in which the officers use headphones to experience what it would be like to struggle with auditory hallucinations. We have local resources and our hospital protocols, and then we do some scenario training to ensure that the information that we've gone over the 40 hours is actually sticking, and that that law enforcement professional who's volunteered to be a CIT officer has the skill set to move forward to serve the community appropriately. Within this, we ended up with some co-response models as well, which we referred to a little while ago. So we've got the CIT intervention, which the Department of Public Safety and our office, the Westchester County Department of Public Safety and our office has really co-sponsored for the past 14 years. But during that time, we also developed some co-response models within the city of White Plains, later on the city of Yonkers, and most recently the city of New Rochelle. The city of White Plains came in response to the incident on the gallery, on the top of the Galleria Mall, where Concetta Russo was murdered by a gentleman, and I use the term loosely, who was homeless, was not a person who had serious mental health concerns, but he certainly had some stuff going on, without a shadow of a doubt. We began to take a look at how we might be able to work more collaboratively. I took one of our outreach workers and I stationed them over at the White Plains Police Department, and we began our co-response model with the city of White Plains. Later on, there were some concerns as some of our homeless shelters began to shift where the overnight drop-in shelter was. There were concerns expressed by the city of Yonkers that many people were being shifted from the city of White Plains and where the overnight drop-in used to be at the Westchester County Airport to the city of Yonkers, and we began our co-response model in the city of Yonkers because we added a clinician into the city of Yonkers to co-respond to people who might be in a state of crisis, who also maybe struggling with issues around homelessness. And we've partnered with the Department of Social Services in that way to try to help fast track people into the system when we can. And then in the city of New Rochelle was our most recent addition, and we are working within the Community Policing Division in the city of New Rochelle. Their CIU handle their mental health crises, and if it turns out that they have a person that they've de-escalated, the clinician that we have embedded there will get the person connected with the appropriate supports. So these programs are not just focused on de-escalation. If it turned out that we were only focused on de-escalation, we would go out time and time and time again, over and over, de-escalating the same situation. These initiatives are really focused on getting people linked to the appropriate services so that they don't have to have continued interaction with law enforcement because they have the services that are going to be meaningful for their recovery. Let's move to the next slide. We would love to be able to have a co-response embedded in each of the police departments, but simply that's not a fiscal reality. If we had a robust system, I think it would be fantastic. We did end up with a grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the New York State Office of Mental Health Division of Forensic Services to provide ATI, or Alternative to Incarceration Services, through People USA with our crisis stabilization team. And they act as a resource for all of the other police departments that are listed here on the screen. From Peekskill, Portchester, Rye, Mamaroneck to Larchmont, Irvington, Hastings, Dobbs Ferry, People USA has a crisis stabilization team, and they're seated with us here at the Department of Community Mental Health, and they will reach out to people in the community that have come in contact with law enforcement, not necessarily for a criminal issue, but because they were in a state of crisis, or it could be because of a criminal issue. We have one clinician that is part-time embedded over at the Greenburgh Police Department. And she has been functioning there for a while. So we do have sort of an embedded person there. We chose Greenburgh because of the wide geographic swath that Greenburgh takes up within Westchester County. Let's move to the next slide. So since we didn't have something for everyone, which we really would like to be able to have, but we're trying to do this with the best of our resources. In the beginning of the current pandemic, there were a lot of concerns expressed by the Westchester County Police Chiefs Association about what can we do differently, because we wanted to keep people with mental health concerns who didn't need to be in the hospital, but were certainly in a state of crisis, as well as law enforcement professionals out of the hospital, because our hospitals within Westchester County were hotbeds of COVID. We didn't want people in the community with mental health concerns becoming ill. We didn't want police officers becoming ill. So we started our mobile assessment program, which is akin to what they've done out in Western New York. Western New York actually has a more formalized program where they use an iPad to provide a virtual assessment. We are not at the point of using an iPad for that virtual assessment, but what we have done is we've made a mental health resource, whether it be a part of the crisis stabilization team, a part of the staff within the Department of Community Mental Health, and in the initial stages, we also involved the crisis prevention response team. Each police department was assigned a person so that they could have a liaison if it turned out that they could provide some level of support. And going along with that, if it turned out that the person needed to go to the hospital because it was something beyond just linking them with resources, what we ended up doing is we would end up calling the emergency room ahead of time. Sarah Servadio is our hospital liaison. She would make a telephone call to the local hospital, or any of us that were acting as those mental health resources would speak to someone in the emergency department to make sure that they were aware that this is a person who's in a state of crisis, and so that way you could have a rapid transition of custody. The person would get the care that they needed, and we would minimize the risk of exposure to COVID. If there is a criminal element, we do have the Ricky data match system. You can move right to the next slide. So if it turns out that the police department is using the Ricky fingerprint system and they've issued a desk appearance ticket, move to the next slide. There's an email that comes in to a number of us on a need-to-know basis, which details who is in the Ricky fingerprint system. So if we have a match, Portchester Police arrest somebody, that person is is known to the public mental health system. We end up with a data match, which move to the next slide. I'll give you a quick example. We've taken the personal identities out, and this was in early in October. These were people that had come in with contact with different law enforcement organizations and the charges that they were facing. And we wanted to be able to look to see how we might be able to get people connected with services as opposed to penetrating further into the justice system. So this is another way in which we're able to intervene in the lives of people who might be in a state of crisis, who had a chargeable offense, but we wanted to make sure that we could address their needs as well. We're moving right through. Next slide. So we've taken a look at some other opportunities. Joe, did you want to talk about the 911 diversion, the Broom County model? Do you want me to do that? I'm happy to have a sip of water.
I would be happy to do that briefly, Mark. As Mark pointed out initially, many people who aren't going to, in the moment, remember a phone number for a crisis line or for our offices, the number that people will remember is 911. The way that 911 currently works, and you all probably know this better than I do, is that when you dial 911, you get a dispatcher. We actually have the equivalent of 3 different 911 systems in this county, but they all generally work the same way. You call 911, you get a dispatcher. That dispatcher makes a determination initially as to where that call is going to be directed. Is it going to go to fire? Is it going to go to police? Is it going to go to medical? What the 911 diversion model and what Broom County did was they added a 4th option. And that 4th option is that we need to have people people in need can be referred based upon what their specific emotional issue is at that time. If it's a crisis, that potentially gets diverted one way. If it's one of those individuals who calls all the time just because they're lonely and depressed and need someone to talk to, and you know that dispatchers get those calls regularly, there's a place to connect them for a warm line. It's basically identifying the array of services that are available for people in need and determining how to best connect to services. So it could be some of the existing models, or will largely be the existing models that we're looking at, It could be a call to the crisis stabilization team. It could be a call to police and a co-responder. It could be a call to a CIT trained officer, or it could be specifically referred directly to a mental health professional who we can connect with. We also now have an advantage that at least currently, many of the services that are provided on the mental health side can be provided through telehealth. So it may be also connecting an individual in need with a person who can literally work with them through their phone, through their tablet or their laptop or whatever mechanism is available to help stabilize them and help them address their needs. Because in part, the purpose here is to make contact with the individuals, identify their needs, and begin to divert them away from the criminal justice system, away from the emergency rooms, and towards the care that they need. And the thing about the sequential intercept model that Mark just walked us all through is that is the entire point of the sequential intercept model, to identify people at the point of need and work to connect them with the services they need so that they don't wind up in, remain, or find themselves continually cycling through the criminal justice system. So that's what we look at with the 911 diversion model, that it is literally the first place that once someone reaches out through 911 for help, it is the first place that we can identify a need and begin to work with individuals, not just to meet their needs, but also to lighten the burden on many of our law enforcement officials. Because if law enforcement doesn't need to respond, that frees them up to do other things. And it's also important to keep in mind that if there is law enforcement involved in a mental health response, if that individual has to go to the hospital, if that individual needs someone to stay with them for a period of time, it's very time consuming for law enforcement. So that if we have trained professionals doing that, not only will it cut down on the amount of law enforcement time spent doing that, it will also, in all likelihood, cut down on the total amount of time spent doing that, because you'll have individuals more capable of addressing the need at that time.
So let's jump to the next slide, Blanca, because it really talks about what Joe was talking about with the 911 diversion. Just punch in each of those things, just transition them right in. And this was put together by Mike Hatch. Mike was a chief out in Johnson City in Broom County, and he wanted to take a look to see if there were other there were other opportunities other than police, fire, EMS. Could they include a mental health response? So bring everything on that page down. It's going to keep it coming. Keep it coming. There you go. And then the last thing is a mental health counselor. And what Mike said is, when possible, a mental health call should receive a mental health response. Now, we also recognize that there may be concerns that for safety, if knowing that we've operated the system the way that we always have, is there an opportunity or are there possibilities that this might be an unsafe situation? But they set up a decision tree as to when it's appropriate to get the person connected with a mental health response. Jump to the next slide and then just hit the audio clip that's in there. Should give us a understanding of how this works. And if it doesn't, we'll jump to the next slide. All right, I don't hear the audio, so I'm going to assume that that for whatever reason it's not working, and that's okay. If we have the opportunity to move forward with it, we'll have many examples of audio of calls that come in that involve a person that doesn't rise to the level of acuity for a police or fire response, but we can get the person connected. So move to the next slide. We'll talk about the behavioral health response team, because I know we have just a short amount of time left. There's another model that's really begun to gain popularity. We've heard time and time again about the CAHOOTS model, which I hope people never, ever say again, because I hate the name of their model. But it is a model that originated in Portland, Oregon. And many years ago, right next door over in Rockland County, they chose to create their mobile crisis team by contracting with Rockland Paramedics, with the behavioral health response team. And New York City has begun to embrace this co-response model of pairing together EMS and paramedic services with a clinician and sometimes a peer to respond to people in crisis. And this may be a fantastic way of doing business, but as Joe said, we want to be able to dispatch the right people or the right model and get people the right level of care. And there's going to be sometimes when it will need to be law enforcement responding because it is a dangerous situation, dangerous to everyone involved. And in those situations, those officers need to have the appropriate training so that they go home safely at the end of the day. The person in crisis goes to where they need to be, and the other citizens in the community are also taken care of, dealt with safely. With the behavioral health response team, we want to make sure we get the right people there because this does have the potential, if we don't do it properly, to have some adverse outcomes in and of itself. So let's move into the next slide. I think this could be a fantastic addition to our system of care, but we have to have people who are trained. The intervention should be used for lower risk situations where mobile response should work in coordination with that 911 diversion. And at this point, my understanding is and my experience is that EMS receives very little, if no training at all, on how to deal with people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. So from my perspective, if we were to embrace this as a potential opportunity, we would want to make sure that our EMS personnel are creating those same types of relationships, developing those same types of partnership, having the same skill set to yet de-escalate people, or in the same understanding of how to navigate the mental health system. Despite the fact that they may have a clinician embedded, we still want them to have that common language, and we still want to be able to get people connected, because even right next door over in Rockland County, they did have an incident in which one of the clinicians that they had on the behavioral health response team was assaulted by a 15-year-old young person who was experiencing behavioral discontrol or dysregulation because of a number of things that they had going on in their life. We want to make sure that if we're going to embrace this, that people have the appropriate training to stay safe. And it should be within a continuum of opportunities that we have to intervene in people's lives. This is not a panacea. This should be a piece of the puzzle, though. And I think we are at the last slide. So what our recommendations are continue to offer that CIT training and technical assistance to local municipalities in order to help formalize teams with training days, pins, all of the things that we talked about before. There's also been some discussion, and we should consider for some of the smaller jurisdictions having a county-wide CIT team to provide mutual aid to other departments or support to other departments, and take a look at mutual aid agreements for those departments that are next door to each other. If Hastings doesn't have a CIT team, but Dobbs Ferry does, or maybe Greenberg does, how can we work best together to make sure that we have the appropriate mental health response? Expand the crisis stabilization team as well as our co-response initiatives, and explore the feasibility of developing this 911 diversion model and develop a behavioral health response team with enhanced training for EMS as well, so we can help create those partnerships. So from our perspective, these are some of the things that we think would be helpful in making a better system. That's it.
Well, thank you, Mark and Deputy Commissioner Glazer, and for us the opportunity to present. And we hope we share a continuum of opportunities from training, and it all goes back to really creating partnerships within the disciplines. So thank you.
Thank you very much to our DCMH staff and our team for putting together this informative presentation. We're going to go now to questions and comments from our chat box. Please note for everybody that since this meeting is recorded, everyone will receive a link of this presentation so that you can share it with your colleagues and your local police reform task force committees. So let's get started with some of these questions. If you just give me 1 second. We can check questions that come up. Let's see. So they're asking for slideshows, of course. If it's okay, Mark, if we can share your PowerPoint presentation with the team,
Absolutely.
with everybody, great. Let me see. So Chris Cole writes, the theory is great, but where is the help at 3 a.m. with resources to respond, for example, CITs to respond to a scene and assist officers? Do any of you want to comment?
Well, I can tell you that the CIT model itself, the officers are empowered because they've got the specialized training. Remember, this is not a group of officers that are sitting around waiting for the fire horn to go off. They're regular patrol officers. We want to make sure that if it's a mental health crisis, a CIT officer is on the scene. I can tell you that at 3 o'clock in the morning, I have answered my phone for some of those officers who have tried to intervene, though I'm not the be-all, end-all. I do think we need to have a more robust response system, including we do have members of the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team. They always have someone who's going to pick up the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're not going to be mobile 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would love to be able to enhance our crisis response, our crisis stabilization team response, whether it be through People USA, through our co-response, to address, to meet the needs in that way. Because you're absolutely right. The response at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is always going to be different than it is at 3 o'clock in the morning. For those places that we've had a person who's been embedded, the officer is able to handle the situation at 3 o'clock in the morning, but the report goes to the community policing division. So the social worker or clinician can follow up the next day to make sure that the services that are put in place are meaningful to the person. So that way law enforcement doesn't have to go back and de-escalate and resolve the situation again.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to comment? Okay, Michael Mui asks, is CIT an annual requirement for LEA or just a one-time training?
It is at this point, if a law enforcement officer wants to participate, volunteers to participate, or their agency encourages them to participate in the CIT training, it is a one-time training. And that's why I encourage, if we're going to move forward with this as a more robust program, there should be dedicated training days for CIT officers, just as you do for SWAT, just as you do for aviation. They're dedicated training days for any specialized unit. And I truly believe that they should have the opportunity to have continuing education in other areas that we're not able to cover within the 40 hours of training.
Thank you. We have with us also Gerald Steckmeister, who is from our Public Safety Department. Mr. Steckmeister, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the department?
Yes, thank you. We've been we've tried to be very proactive in adopting this model. A lot of the concerns we have are training. We have to train enough people so we have people at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that if that officer takes a day off, there's backup. Another question we have is about training for dispatchers. When we go into a scene, we're going there based on normally inaccurate or incomplete information. And is there any kind of training for the dispatchers where they can ask the appropriate questions to give us a better idea of what we're going into?
I think that's exactly what we're looking to do with the 911 diversion model, because they're gathering additional information that are going to be important to the officers. There are also many times in which the police agencies that are represented across Westchester County end up with 945 mental hygiene law or 960 mental hygiene law pickup order. When those of us who are writing those mental hygiene law pickup orders, when that order is written from our office, We try to give you as much information as possible. We give the exigent circumstance as to why the person needs to go to the hospital. But we also give you information if we know the person's known to have weapons, may be intoxicated, may have dangerous animals in the home. We don't want your officers to enter a situation that may be dangerous to them. And if we have that information and we're not sharing it, I think that's irresponsible of us. So it's something that we've tried to do. The issue is that not every designee of the Director of Community Support of Michael Orth, not every designee does their business the exact same way, and that's something that we have to work on the mental health side of the fence. We have to get our DCS designees up to speed, because I think we do need to provide as much information to you as possible without compromising anybody's confidentiality. We do want to make sure that your officers are safe in these crisis situations.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Steckmeister, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I just want to say one last thing. Chief Calabrese is one of the first chiefs to sit through the CIT training, and I commend him for being there the entire time. We haven't had that level of commitment anywhere within the county, so I appreciate our county public safety's commitment to this.
Thank you. Is there any recommendation on the number of hours for continuing training for CIT officers?
Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. I will be happy to reach out to some of our partner agencies. I mean, when most of the programs that we've developed here in Westchester, they're not these great ideas that just sprung miraculously out of my head. I've stolen them from other places. Our police co-response model comes out of the LAPD's camp model. So we've taken little pieces of the puzzle, and I'll be happy to take a look at what the appropriate number of continuing education or continued training hours would be, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant. We have a question from Alex Morales. Do you believe there could be a benefit to having CIT members always wear body cams or use mental health events as case studies for ongoing tuning to the program?
I think there definitely is a benefit to body cams right across the board. When body cams first came out, I actually had a little bit of apprehension about them, but when I saw my partners on the law enforcement side of the fence say, we want the documentation, we want to be able to be seen as doing this well, it also has given us an opportunity to take a look back at some of those interventions to see where what we as a collective program on both the mental health and the law enforcement side of the fence, what we did well in those situations, and maybe where we could improve what we're doing. So I think that they're great. I actually have a piece of body cam footage from a sergeant from not Poughkeepsie, from Newburgh, which we've used within training in the past, and it's really kind of incredible to see how this one sergeant in the city of Newburgh is able to work with a gentleman who's experiencing a mental health crisis, and how well she does in de-escalating him and getting him connected. It's good training. It's good material for training. We don't want to violate people's confidentiality, but it's good for us. We should always be evaluating what we do. We want to continuously grow and do better.
Thank you. Stephanie Marquezano asks, what type of opportunities, if any, are there specifically for school resource officers?
We've had lots of school resource officers come into our CIT training. There is another, I don't want to say module, but it's a variation on the CIT program. There's a youth CIT program that's been developed. We have not offered it here within Westchester County. We have not gotten to that point. Many of our SROs, many of the people who are SROs have been through our CIT training, but I think it would be great to offer the youth CIT training as well.
And Mark, if I may add, we've seen data that the SRO model works best if embedded in a school-wide model that is addressing behavior. So there are many districts within the county that use what's called positive behavior intervention supports model, a three-tiered system. So there's greater success if they're embedded in that type of model rather than a standalone.
Thank you. Just another quick opportunity for anyone else who would like to comment or ask any questions. Stephanie says thank you for your response, Commissioner and Mr. Giuliano. All right, I think if anything, we will certainly follow up by email to all of the participants for today's event with the link to this recording as well as a separate copy of the PowerPoint. Gentlemen, would you like to have a parting words before we wrap up?
And I'd like to say something.
Sure.
And if there are any additional questions that people have that they think of after the fact, please feel free to email me, and I will relay all the information to Blanca. Thank you.
I would just like to share on behalf of our department, again, just to reinforce how much we appreciate working with our law enforcement partners, as well as our community partners. This is really a true collective partnership. As Mark said, safety is always paramount for everyone involved. And between the resources of mental health, of the law enforcement and the community, clearly our goal is to develop a safety net system, and whenever possible, trying to divert crisis situations. So we're excited to be part of not only county planning, but also local planning as well. So thanks for having us.
My last parting word would be that if anyone needs technical assistance or support or information about CIT, I'm happy to help. Don't be shy. We're here, and we're here to support all of you within the municipalities and throughout the county in developing these types of services and supports. And yes, I pick up the phone at 3 in the morning.
Yes, and that is definitely true. Mark picks up the phone at all hours of the day and night. And what we're looking really to do is, with the partnership in the community and in the county, is to find ways to expand what we're doing. Someone has already raised the question of, how do we handle these things overnight? And we understand that for us to be successful, we need to expand the models that we have in place, and possibly even add a couple, because we know that there are some things that we could do and we could do better. So we're looking to you as our partners to give us the guidance to think about what would work better in your community, what you need now in your community. As you work this process through and you see these things, part of the reason that we wanted to present this to you, and I really thank Blanca and Ellen for helping us get this message out, what we wanted to do was work with you to identify how you can do better with our help, that which you're trying to accomplish. So don't be shy. If there's something you have a question about, if there's something that you'd like us to come out and talk to your folks about, and if you'd like us to do a version of this or a different version of this presentation, let us know. We're fully invested in helping our communities better work with people in crisis, to make it safer and more effective for everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. Special thanks, obviously, to Commissioner Orth, Deputy Commissioner Glazer, Program Director Giuliano, and our Lieutenant Steckmeister from the Public Safety Department for participating in today's event. As you all know, we will have this link available by email. And prior to this event, Commissioner Gleason did distribute, as well as Ellen distributed, a link to a recording that provided an overview of the Police Training Academy. So if any of you would like that information again, please let Ellen know, and she'll be more than happy to send it out and share it with all of you. So thank you all. We wish you a happy holiday season, a safe holiday season, and thank you again for participating. Have a great day.
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
Take care.
Bye-bye.